Hey, this is Daniel, and this is the second pymax tutorial. We're going to see in this tutorial how to send musical notes to Max using a generator and the pynote object in Max. And we're also going to see how to control those events in real time. So we'll get started by creating a generator class, and this example is just going to be a super simple example. We're just going to make a metronome, something that outputs a click or a musical note at regular intervals. So just like in the last tutorial, we're going to define a generator. Let's call it metronome. And like in the last tutorial, it's going to yield a list of elements. And the first element in that list has to be the on time. It always has to be the on time in pymax. You always have to yield lists that begin with an on time. Now the rest of the elements in the list, like we said, can be anything you want them to be. But if you want to send musical notes to Max, you can use the pynote object in Max. And if you send it lists where the elements, there's a certain number of elements ordered in a certain way, then that pynote object will output them really cleanly. So the elements in the list have to be these in this order. They have to be the pitch of the note you're sending. They have to be the MIDI velocity, which is a value between 0 and 128, the volume, the duration of the note that you're sending, and then the channel. So a 5-element list, those elements in that order. And of course, we need to put in a while statement to make this generator actually spit things out. And we have to define the elements in the list because we haven't defined them yet. Well, we'll start with a on time of 0. That means it's going to start immediately. Let's let our pitch be equal to 60. Let's let our velocity be equal to 100, relatively loud. Let's let our duration, now we'll be working in milliseconds for this first example, and then I'll show you how to use beats and change the tempo. But for now, let's say our duration is 500 milliseconds, half of a second. And then our channel will just be MIDI channel 1. So this is our generator. We're pretty much done, except that we have to change the on time so that it'll keep yielding events over time. Let's make this a really, really simple generator, something that just spits out a note once every second. So we're going to increase, nope, we're not going to make it equal to 1,000. We're going to increase our on time by 1,000 milliseconds with each pass through the generator. So this is a really simple generator. You can't do much with it except for spit out beats at a fixed time interval, but that'll get us started. So to send the events from this generator through pymax into Max, we're going to make this module executable if name equals main. So the first thing we have to do is import pymax. So from pymax music, import pymax. Then we have to open pymax. We have to add our generator. So pymax add generator. Let's just call it metronome. So the first argument to add generator is the string, which is the name we're calling the instance of the generator that Max MSP will call. So we'll just call it metronome, and we're giving that the generator function metronome. Run, and then we run it. So we're all set up. This module, if I didn't make a silly mistake, then this module should run when I call it for Max. So let's set up the Max side here. Instead of a pygen object, since we're outputting things in this particular format, this list, we can use the pynote object. The pynote object takes the same arguments and the same messages in the same inlets as the pygen object. So the time value is going to be milliseconds. And then the generator we're calling is metronome. The nice thing about the pynote object is that, as opposed to one outlet that where the pygen object spits out a list of all the events we're sending out, the list would be every list except for the first element. The pynote object actually splits that list up and it sends the elements to a note out object. So you can hook the pynote object straight up to a note out object and it'll send that note data out in the proper way. The data it sends out, if you want to do other things with it, is the pitch, the velocity, and the channel. And the duration is actually dealt with inside the note out inside the pynote object. So we're going to start it with a toggle. And that should be all we need to do. So let's run the Python module. Tells us the pymax loop is entered. Control C to exit it. So let's see if it works. There we have a generator. A metronome generator. It's pretty silly. You can't do too much with it. So let's see how we could change some things. Well, the first nice way to change things is by, instead of making things a fixed tempo, by giving the time values in milliseconds, we can make them a relative tempo relative to, we can have it send out events based at a certain tempo. So the way we do that is we have to change a couple of the things. We have to change the on time values here in the Python patch, and then here in the max patch we're going to change the milliseconds to beats. Let me show you what we're doing here before I trip up all over myself. So if we're going to send beats, we don't actually have to tell the Python module that we're sending beats instead of milliseconds. We just have to give it beats instead of milliseconds. So in this case, if we want the on time to increase by 1 beat, we'll just have it increase by 1 instead of 1,000 milliseconds. And just for the sake of completion, I can say that it's 1.0 beats in case I want to do fractional beats. Didn't really need to do that. Also, the duration will need to be in beats too, so we'll let it be half a beat long. Okay, how does it know that I'm talking about beats and not milliseconds here? How does it know that I'm not increasing things by 1 millisecond and that my duration is half a millisecond? Well, the way it knows that is because I change the first argument of pynote from ms to beats. That's all I have to do. Pygen also works with beats. But so now it's going to control things in beats, and the default tempo is 60, but I can also change the tempo by sending in a value to the rightmost inlet. So let's see how that works. I'm going to, first I have to exit. I have to press Control C here. Doesn't like it. Sometimes I have to do it a couple times. There we go. So I've exited my original running module, so now I can run it again. Run without debugging. Okay, I'm going to set my tempo. Now I have to set my tempo after I started the Python module running the pymax, because if I try to set it before I start running pymax, the Python module won't pick it up. So there's my tempo at 74. I'm going to start it. Let's see what happens. You can slow it down. I can speed it up. Pretty cool, huh? So in the next tutorial, I'll cover the PyObject max object and how to change the other aspects of this metronome, like the pitch and the velocity and the duration.